contribution to the world of Torah literature continued after the Siddur. What was the next major project?
Next project was the Mesorah, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, which is also very, very important because, the piyutim, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, are unintelligible. I mean, I went through Mesorah, had to look up the psukim that they're based on. They're very, very poetic. They're very beautiful, and very hard to understand. So that was a new challenge.
Was it very time-consuming doing that type of research? Did you have to consult with piyutim experts to understand the breadth and depth of it? Or?
There were a few svarim, not many. There are a few svarim that deal with the Mesorah, with the piyutim.
And were you able to borrow some of the basic material from the Siddur and incorporated that into the Mesorah?
Yeah, much of the Mesorah is the regular Siddur. Karbonis, Psukkah de Zimra, so a lot of it comes from the Siddur. The hard part is the things that are exclusively in the Mesorah.
And again, the Mesorah has that, what I would call the iconic introduction that has become synonymous with each of these volumes, and you put a tremendous amount of work into that as well.
Overview.
The overview. Let's stick to the right term. After the Mesorah, we're moving into the late 80s. Was the stone chumash the next major project?
Yeah.
How did that idea come about, to do that form of a chumash?
Well, it was the logical next step because the stone chumash really follows the pattern of the Siddur and the Mesorah. And there was a need for that kind of chumash. There was no other chumash like it. The only thing that approaches the Siddur was the chumash rather, the Hertz chumash that Chief Rabbi Hertz of Great Britain produced in the 30s, I believe. And they're really very interesting insight. Somebody showed me an article, a review article about the Hertz chumash. Hertz was a frum Jew. He wasn't your reformer conservative rabbi. He was a very frum Jew, and he wanted the chumash to represent what the Mefarshim, what Chazal say. However, he was dealing with a clientele which was, I wouldn't say thoroughly assimilated, but to a great deal was assimilated. Even the Orthodox community in England was not what we would consider, in the 21st century, what we would consider a Torahic community, far from it. And this review article that somebody showed me lambasted him, criticized him. He thinks he's writing for an educated, sophisticated public, and he really expects us to believe these stories as if they really happened. So what Rabbi Hertz had to do was to present the Chumash and explain it according to the Mesorah, but at the same time to make it palatable to these, educated, sophisticated people, quote unquote. So for example, he would quote Matthew Arnold. We can't quote Matthew Arnold. We stick to Chazal.
Right. I think the Hertz Chumash is also written in a bit more of a complex type of lingo that the everyday man may not understand.
Yeah, that was the intellectual English language of Great Britain in the 1930s.
Exactly, and it's not the vernacular.
The same way that the Hirsch Chumash is Hochdeutsch.
Right.
Even in Germany, it was an intellectual brand of German.
Right, and I would say also that later on the Sansino Gemara, I think, also had that issue where it wasn't language that everyday English speakers spoke.
True.
So the Stone Chumash definitely broke new ground in that sense, bringing a commentary and a translation that's understandable. You did not choose to translate Rashi, though you did obviously include the Chumash text, Onkelos, and
and
Rashi's commentary.
And one other thing, which is very important. What translation do you use? What do you do if the Ramban or Sforno or Ibn Ezra don't go with Rashi?
Right.
Whose translation do you use? And we consulted on that. Meir spoke to Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, his Rebbe. I spoke to Rabbi Yankiv. And there was absolute agreement by everybody. Chumash means Chumash Rashi. So the translation follows Rashi even where others have something that fits the words better, but we stick with Rashi.
And then on the bottom, you bring in the commentary,
the
other Mefarshim. And what's unique to the stone Chumash, and I wonder whose idea that was that at the end of every parsha, there's a commentary or a comment from Reb David Feinstein regarding the number of psukim in each parsha, which is very unique. How did that come about, that addition?
Well, Meir was very, very close to Reb David.
Right.
They were in yeshiva together. David was quite a bit older, but it's like an older brother, but they were very, very close. And he knew that Reb David always had something on the number of the psukim in the parasha, and he thought it would be a nice idea to include it. So Reb David gave us the material.
And it really does add a unique flavor at the end of every parsha that I know I appreciate and I'm sure many others do. And
Reb David has an amazing original mind. Reb David, for example, Reb David says a Chumash shir every Erev Shabbos.
Sure.
I think half hour, 45 minutes. He never quotes anybody. It's all original. Reb David is a low-key kind of person, but he's come to be recognized in America as the Gadol Adar.
yeah, absolutely. We're definitely fortunate that we have a Gadol like Reb David guiding Klal Yisrael, but specifically guiding ArtScroll. He's been a father figure.
Always available. Whenever we needed something, he's always available. Meir and he used to speak on the phone every day. I mean, literally every day, not Shabbos. But and he was always available. We had a question, we needed guidance. He was always available.
The feedback to the Chumash was fast in coming as well. Sold very, very well. And what specific feedback have you gotten over the years to the Stone Chumash, which is really unrivaled? It came out, if I'm correct, about 30 years since its release.
About 30 years ago.
About 30 years. And there's really been nothing like it. What feedback have you heard? You spoke about the Siddur impacting people's lives, becoming Bali Tshuva. What have you heard about the Chumash?
It's very interesting. I've heard comments from rabbis, comments from Rabbonim, Talmidei Chachamim, and from people with no Jewish background. Everybody finds something in that Chumash that appealed to them. And that was the design, that was the idea, the same idea that we have with the Siddur. Make the Chumash, first of all, make it comprehensible. Explain it. And the translation, it has to be faithful to the words, but as much as possible, make it a translation that can be readable on its own, even without commentary. And teach people, have them understand some basic concepts, and inspire people. Like we get into, for example, in Meir's Chumash, there are extensive overviews in every parsha. I think on whole Sefer Bereshis, there must be at least 30 overviews, maybe more. In the Chumash, we have an overview that introduces Torah Shebiksav. That stands on its own. And then, for example, Avram is tested. What's the definition of a test? What's the purpose of a test? HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows. He knows what somebody would do or somebody could fail to do. What's the idea? What does it mean? Carbon. Why? How does slaughtering an animal bring you closer to God? What is it telling you? What does it mean? Yetzias Mitzrayim, so many concepts.
And such basic concepts. We're talking about fundamentals of Yiddishkeit.
Basic concepts, and in the Chumash, we try to explain them in just a few paragraphs.
Which is quite daunting. As a writer, it's harder to write something concisely than to write it, in a lengthier fashion.
That's right. It's a challenge, but when you're finished, it feels good.
Sure. Now, this project was a wide-ranging project. Do you remember how long it took you to complete it? And were you still writing longhand at the time?
Yes, I was still writing longhand. And again, it's hard to say how long it took because for much of the time I was doing the Chumash along with other things. Mm-hmm. So it was never full time. But Meir and I felt that, Meir used to have a favorite saying that Ravina and Rav Ashi were the ones who put the final touches on the Gemara, on Talmud Bavli. He said, Ravina said to Rav Ashi, there's a deadline, we have to finish. So we had a deadline, we had promised it by a certain time. So for about a year and a half or so, I worked from home, locked myself in the house.
And that was as a means of maximum productivity.
Give it maximum time and maximum intensity, maximum concentration. During that period, I would come into the office one day a week, sometimes twice a week. But that was, I don't know, at least a year, probably a year and a half or so.
Wow. Now you're talking about locking yourself in a room and really immersing yourself in this Avodas HaKodesh. I have to ask, they say there's no great man without a great woman behind him. And I'm sure that in your case, it would not have been possible to do what you've done and continue to do without a supportive family. And you referenced your Rebbitzin before. Talk about how your commitment to ArtScroll affected the home front and how you were able to balance the two.
No, you're right. Nothing like this can happen without a very good wife. And my wife was more than very good. She was tremendous balas chesed in her own right. She helped countless people. Even now, she's gone almost 8 years. Even now, I have people that I meet or my children meet, and they said how they were faced with a question, a dilemma, and they read about her. Some of them knew her personally. Most had just read about her. And they said, what would Mrs. Scherman do? And that's what they would do. Can I give you an example?
Yeah, absolutely.
There was a woman in Borough Park. She was physically handicapped because she was once badly injured and did not have use of one arm. It affected her mentally also. She lived alone in a basement. She had a cat. She couldn't take care of her personal hygiene. There are a lot of, Noshin Tzidkonius in Klal Yisrael. They would bring her food. They would shop for her. If she needed something. They would not come into the room because it smelled. And you had the cat. And cats don't flush the toilet. And my wife used to go into her and take her laundry. And when she had to go to the hospital, she said, I can't go to the hospital. Who's going to take care of the cat? And my wife said, I'll take care of the cat. I'll come in and feed the cat. My wife hated cats. She did it. The laundry she did in the laundromat. She didn't want to put it in our washing machine. Mm-hmm. So why am I telling you this? As an example, I got a letter several months ago from a woman in Monsey who had no idea who it is, never heard of her. She signed it, but I never heard of her. And she said she had a similar situation where she was asked to take care of someone, and it was very unpleasant. And she didn't want to do it. And then she thought, what would Mrs. Scherman do? And she did it. So, if you need a wife who's going to help you, even when you have to concentrate on your work, and sometimes you get home very, very late.
Mm-hmm.
Baruch Hashem, I had it.
There were probably sacrifices made, but I think it would be fair to say that the accomplishments that we see are definitely credit to her.
Yeah, she was.
And together, you and your Rebbetzin was zeichet to raise a beautiful family, Baruch Hashem, of children, now great grandchildren, great grandchildren,
yeah,
who are a nachas. So it's definitely a tribute to her, as you mentioned.
Rosh, I told you I was about to Keah, and she davened in Chaim Berlin. She liked the yeshiva davening. And during the break, she would say Tillim that the tekiah should be good.
That's called a devoted wife, right?
Yeah.
Going back to projects, we referenced the stone chumash as a monumental achievement. As you moved into the 90s, what were the projects on your table? And as ArtScroll undertook probably its biggest project, which was the Schottenstein edition, what was your role in guiding that project and weighing in on important decisions as that project made its way through Masechta after Masechta?
I had almost no role in the Schottenstein Talmud. Being in consultations, whenever I was needed, I would be available. Sometimes the editors would send me something to look over, and maybe it should be rewritten to make it more palatable. How do you explain something? But those were limited occasions.
What do you think, and how were you impacted by the Schottenstein Gemara when it first came out, and it really took the Torah world by storm? There had never been a translation like that.
Let me give you some background. Meir and I became close to Rabbi Yankov. We would consult with him. I mentioned before, Chumash with Chumash Rashi. When we were doing Shir HaShirim, how do you explain Shir HaShirim? On a literal translation, it's just...
It's allegory, allegorically.
It's erotic.
Right.
How do you... So we went to Rabbi Yankov, and Rabbi Yankov said, Shir HaShirim is a mashal. To translate Shir HaShirim literally falsifies Shir HaShirim. That's not what it means. So he said, take one of the Mefarshim, preferably Rashi, but not necessarily, and translate it according to that, according to the allegory. So if you read our translation of Shir HaShirim, it's not at all literal. It explains the psukim with the nimshal, but the message rather than strictly the words. So as I said, we used to consult Rabbi Yankov all the time. And at one point he said, and when will you do the Shas? And we laughed, we thought he was joking, we do the Shas, we do the Shas. He was very serious. I remember word for word what he said. He said, ihr kennt das Ton, und ihr darft das Ton, und ihr werdet das Ton. Der Eibishter et mir schenken Joren, elach schreib ma brief. He said, you can do it, and you should do it, and you will do it, and if HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives me the years, I'll write you a letter. He did not have the years. We started doing it 6 years after that, and he was already gone. But that, when it gave us a lot of encouragement. We still felt that it was too much, that too great a project for us. I'll tell you a little bit later how we were able to finance it. That's a story in itself.
Right.
But At first we thought, show how naive we were. At first we thought, there are people saying very good, popular Daf Yomi shiurim. So we'll get tapes. In those days it was tapes.
Right.
In those days we'll get tapes of the shiurim, and we'll have them transcribed. And then we'll do a little bit of editing, and we'll print it. No.
Did you try?
No.
You tried it?
Well, we tried it. It was obviously impossible. No, it would never work.
Mm-hmm.
So we had one of the great brachas, the Siyata D'Shmaya, that the Rabbi Shalom somehow gave us treasures, literally treasures. And this particular treasure was called Herschel Goldworm. Herschel Goldworm was brilliant. We were in yeshiva together.
At Beis Medrash Elyon,
In
is
Beis
it?
Medrash Elyon. And he had a position teaching 12th grade in the yeshiva, and he was a magnificent rabbi. He knew everything, and he knew how to teach. Talmidim loved him. The yeshiva folded, and he was left without parnasa. His father-in-law was in the diamond business, so he was selling diamonds, but he was not a diamond salesman. And at that time we needed someone. We were thinking of doing Sefer Doniel, because we were doing Sfarim of Tanakh.
Right.
And I said, I have this friend, and he can do it. And if his English is probably not up to par, so I'll edit him. So we brought him in. It was breath of fresh air. It was like sunshine. He knew everything. He was Yirei Shamayim, a Chassidish Yid, an Onav, available for it, and made nothing of himself. Purely service to the Rabbi Nosson, service to Klal Yisrael, service to anybody who needed help. So when it came to the Gemara, he was involved in Mishnayos also, especially the more difficult
That's the Yad Avram series.
Right, the original Mishnayos, Yad Avram. So when we came to Gemara, he was the logical one to set the tone for the project, which he did. The style of the Gemara has evolved a little bit over the years, but basically it's with him.
And that's credit to him.
Credit to him. And I'll give you one small example. The first Masechta we did was Masechta Makos. And there's a Reb Kiva Eger, interesting Reb Kiva Eger in the beginning of Makos. And they asked me to write it up, which I did. And I fitted it into the commentary. And Herschel said, it's very nice, and it's probably correct, but we're not here to say our own chidushim. We're here to explain the Gemara according to Rashi. And that was the pattern from the beginning.
And that was the style that the Schottenstein edition continued. Gemara with Rashi.
Of course, there's more, and the notes
more, obviously,
give much more. For example, Rav Elyashiv's Zatzal used our Gemara. He went through the notes of our Hebrew Gemara preparing for his Sheah.
Right.
Rav Elyashiv did not need us to tell him what Rashi says.
Right.
So the fact that the notes are so clear and bring up so many other points for further research, if Rav Elyashiv felt it was important. And how do I know that he felt it was important? First he told us, all right, he's a nice man, maybe he wanted to make us feel good. No, His grandson once called up, he said, he'll be starting this Sheah on Bechairis, and could we send him the volume? It wasn't written yet.
Wow.
He said, well, you probably have galleys. It wasn't written yet. So if Rav Elyashiv had his grandson request Bechairis, that means that he wanted to use it.
No question. You mentioned Rev Goldworm, who tragically passed away in his 50s.
56. 56 years of age.
I believe it was 1993. And I know that only because his name is mentioned in every Shanstein Gemara, and rightfully so,
Yes.
as the pioneer of the project. But he was followed by many outstanding Talmidei Chachamim over the years that you've gotten to know and have become part of the ArtScroll family. Talk about that development of the Talmidei Chachamim and their contribution not only to the Gemara but to the subsequent projects.
Well, there are two levels. There are writers and editors. And Rabbi Cheskel Danziger, who's outstanding Talmud Chacham, he worked with Reb Herschel. He was very devoted to Reb Herschel. Someone once, when we did Kotchim, somebody said to him, "Did you go to Brisk?" No. So he didn't go to Brisk. So how could you? So he said, "My Rebbe in Kotchim is somebody that if the Beis Hamikdash would be built tomorrow, he would tell the Kohanim what to do." That was Herschel.
Oh, really?
He was talking about Herschel. Anyway, he oversees the editors and makes sure that the style is consistent throughout. He's done a lot of writing himself, and a lot of.
It is a unique thing that the Shanstein edition, not only are the Masechtas written by separate people, but within the same Masechta, the Prakim are divided up just because of the yeoman's job that it is to elucidate it. And
Exactly.
yet, as you just alluded to, the translation is pretty much uniform in terms of the flavor of the writing, and that's definitely a unique
and the commentary, the
accomplishment.
elucidation, it all it all fits into the pattern. And sometimes you have writers, they're Talmidei Chachamim, and they want to put in more, and he has to discipline them. This belongs. You're like Herschel from the start. This belongs. This doesn't belong. And the Hebrew Gemara, the problem was even greater because these are real, very, very solid Talmidei Chachamim, and many of them, maybe even most of them, want to say their own, and they have what to say.
Right.
And Rabbi Cheskel disciplines them. He trains them. Training is the right word. He actually trains them in how to present something, and what to present, and what does not belong here. So that's there you have two levels. You have the writers, the editors, and then you have Cheskel over them. And since then, Reb Eli Hertzka is in that league, and Zevi Meisel's in that league. And then you have what we call the readers. These are Talmidei Chachamim of Reb Herschel's caliber. And their function is twofold. First of all, if editors have a question, they have a problem, they can call them, they can discuss it with them. So they provide guidance. And they read the finished project, finished product rather, and they pass on it for correctness, for accuracy, and they'll send back notes. They'll ask for corrections, and we call them the super editors, readers, super editors. There was Rabbi Malinowitz, who was tragically nifter just about 2 years ago. A Talmid Chacham who could work 28 hours a day on several different projects. He can work at different Masechtas, and he can work at Mishnayos. And he was available for everything and thorough. And I don't know when he ever slept. Plus he would throw himself into a project. He would do more than he was asked to do. Well, we miss him. But Baruch Hashem, there are other people who were able to pick up the slack, but he was like Reb Herschel, category of his own. Then there was Rabbi Mordechai Marcus, exceptional Talmid Chacham. And he was also one of the readers. he had to stop the last couple of years of his life. He wasn't able to do it anymore, and he's not here anymore. And then we have Rabbi Nosson Scherman, a son of Rabbi Gedalia Shor, who was an Eloi and a Goen in his own right, contemporary and a good friend of Herschel. Rosh Yeshiva Nor Sameach. So that's our team. That's the team that put together the Bavli, the Yerushalmi, the Hebrew, the English.
And you're talking about this team of Talmidei Chachamim and editors and super editors and proofreaders, all outstanding Talmidei Chachamim.
You see, and you need something else. You need something else. You need a combination of skills that is very, very hard to find. It's rare. You need someone whose English is good. Doesn't have to be excellent, but it has to be good. You know, editing is one thing, not rewrite. It has to be someone whose language is good. Can be improved, but it has to be good to start off with. He has to be a Talmid Chacham. If you don't know how to learn a piece of Gemara and learn it well, then you can't be writing the Schottenstein Talmud. So you need a Talmid Chacham whose English is very good. Difficult combination to find. And you need a third talent. He has to be a teacher. He has to know how to explain. You have to be able to explain it so that, there's Reb Chaim Brisker, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik in Brisk, he used to say that if he can't explain his Chiddush to the wagon driver and make him understand it, then it can't be correct. If it's correct, you have to be able to explain it in a simple fashion so that everybody can understand it. Now, some Gemaras are very, very complicated. Not everybody can just pick it up and read it the way you'll read, the Reader's Digest or something like that. But they have to be able to explain something like a Rebbe explaining something to a class on the level of the class so that they can understand it. So a triple whammy: language, Lamdas, Talmid Chacham, and teacher. Very hard to find that combination.
And it is interesting that the final product is something that could be understood by the layman, but is also appreciated by
Rabbi Elyashiv,
by Gedolei Torah. And that combination is definitely rare. But I want to go back to the Talmidei Chachamim. We're talking about a virtual kollel that ArtScroll put together. And you mentioned before about the fundraising.
Reb Moshe used to say, and Reb Meir liked this, he always repeated it, a kollel on vent. A kollel without walls, because they're not all in the same base medrash.
Right. Absolutely. And these Talmidei Chachamim across the world, both in Eretz Yisrael and here in the United States, are working on behalf of ArtScroll, and that's quite a costly endeavor. So the idea came about to establish a foundation to pay for the research of the projects. Talk about that, the introduction of that idea.
Tell you how that happened. So when we were still in our small original building on Coney Island Avenue.
1969, Coney Island Avenue.
Yeah, you're right, 1969 Coney Island Avenue. Next to Nino's restaurant and across the street from a gas station. And somebody came in. Meir and I worked on the second floor. Somebody came in, he said to the receptionist, he would like to meet the principals. All right, come up. He came to say thank you because he said he's been learning the Mishnah and he appreciates it, he's gone through the whole thing, just came to say thank you. And how do you do this? Well, it turned out his name was Joel Fleischman. At that time, he was the first senior vice president of Duke University. And Duke, according to current ratings, is the fifth best university in the United States. And he was He was a professor, and in addition, the first senior vice president. That's not a small position. Anyway, he asked us, well, how do you produce such work? And we said with long hours and sometimes borrowing. And he said, look, I've been at Yale and I'm at Duke. You cannot produce such work without a tax-exempt foundation because this is very expensive. And he volunteered. He enlisted the tax attorney of Duke, not a Jew, and together they would set up a foundation and walk it through the IRS, make sure that it's impeccable. Foundation can't be ArtScroll. ArtScroll, Mesorah Publications cannot take tax-exempt money. We're a business.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Maybe it's not the most successful business in the world, but we're a business. To be tax-exempt, you have to be a legitimate charity. And he worked it out. There's an arm's-length relationship between Mesorah Publications and Mesorah Heritage Foundation. Most people don't understand that.
Yeah, many people don't. People have asked me, what's ArtScroll, what's Mesorah, what's the foundation, why do you need it? And that's why it's important to explain. People should understand.
All right, so while you brought it up, let me explain it. The same way, for example, you have, let's say, the Metropolitan Opera. You have the conductor, you have the orchestra, you have the singers. They all get paid. And I don't know what tickets cost, but they're not cheap. That's a business. The Metropolitan Opera is a business. But they have to raise money because ticket sales don't pay. Mm-hmm. In the same way that the sales of the ArtScroll Gemara will never pay for the amount of work that goes into it. So there's a foundation that raises money, and they contribute to the opera. But the conductor has nothing to do. The conductor does not get paid by the foundation. Mm-hmm. Now, the same thing here. I'll give you an example of the Gemara. The Gemara, each volume of the Gemara cost between $250,000 and $300,000 to put out. Because we pay writers and editors, we pay them. Mm-hmm. We're not, they're not on welfare.
It's got to be a living wage.
Yeah, they don't get food stamps. As a matter of principle, mm-hmm. we feel that it's wrong. You can't take someone and pay him like an indentured servant who's getting an allowance from Tati. Sales don't cover that. Right. Sales don't cover that. One of the things that Joel Fleischman noticed was he said, at that time, there was no Gemara yet, but there was the Yad Avram Mishnayos. He said, Mishnayos that cost in the middle 20s. He said, I've been at Yale and I've been at Duke. A college textbook of this quality mm-hmm. would go for $80 to $100. That was his question. How do you do it? Mm-hmm. How do you do this at such a moderate cost?
Right.
So the price of the Gemara, people would like to get it for $10 a volume, but the price is still subsidized to make it affordable. You can't do that unless you raise money. So that's what he set up the foundation. Now we have the foundation. Now the trustees of the foundation is Joel himself, Jim Tisch, who's the chairman of Lowe's Corp, Joe Schenker, who's a Talmud of mine in the 5th grade. Uh-huh. Yeah, yes, Chaim Schenker. He's the chairman of Sullivan and Cromwell, which is one of the biggest law firms in the world. Mm-hmm. These are people of very, very high caliber, and the others as well.
And Rav David Feinstein as well, who's on the board of trustees.
these people are not going to be involved in something unless the books are audited and unless everything is done in the up and up. You know, they're not somebody like Joel or Jim Tisch or Joe Schenker. They're not going to let their reputations be jeopardized. So they're on top of it. They know everything that's going on. We have meetings twice a year, and they want to know what's happening. And a reputable accounting firm does audits, one of the top accounting firms in the country. So it really is arm's length. The foundation raises the money. Well, the foundation doesn't raise any money, really. Meir raised the money, now Gedalia raised the money. Mm-hmm. But the money goes to the foundation. And the foundation, these trustees, decide how it should be spent. So that supports the editorial work, not the business end of it,
right.
The editorial work. And then it's turned over to Mesorah Publications, and we get it ready for print and we sell it to the stores.
Right. Now that you're talking about the financial stability brought about by the foundation, but we've heard and read about the financial instability of ArtScroll in the early days, and the sacrifices that you, Rabbi Zlotowitz, and Rabbi Brander had to make to bring ArtScroll to where it is today. Take us back to that time of such uncertainty when you didn't know what the end. You didn't know the end of the story yet.
No. Those early years were no fun. A lot of times we had to borrow to make payrolls. And for many, many years, even until recent years, we borrowed large sums of money over Pesach and over Sukkot. When we're not doing any business, we're closed to make sure that everybody's paid. We never missed a payroll. Never. You know, it's a kollel without walls, but we pay more reliably than the kollel with walls. And there were loans. We both took out home equity loans, which we often plowed into the business to keep things going. And there are people who were very generous, lending us money, and everybody was paid back in time until it reached a point where Baruch Hashem. But getting back to financing the Talmud and other projects as well. You know, once Joel Fleischman had set up the foundation, we were able to raise money tax deductible. Like Harvard. You know, you make contributions. Harvard has an endowment of, I think, over $300 billion. Maybe it's $3 billion, I don't know what it is. But it's in the billions. It's in the billions. And Harvard is a charity, you know?
Sure.
So once we were able to do that, we were able to get people to try and dedicate a Masechta. The first one, Marcus, was dedicated by Marcus Katz, Mexico City. And then, after we started with Marcus because it was a one-volume Masechta, a yeshiva Masechta, so it's something that's widely learned, and yeshiva boys learn it. Parents would be interested in learning and using it to help them learn with their children. That was the first one, and Baruch Hashem, it succeeded. The next one we did was Erevin, because we were hoping to finish Erevin in time for the upcoming Daf Yomi. And
that was written by Rabbi Scherman Reisman, correct?
Right.
He elucidated it.
Yeah, he did. Later on it was upgraded, but he's the one who wrote Erevin. And our good friend Rafi Butler, who at the time was the director of the OU, he introduced us to Jerome Schottenstein, Jay's father. And he dedicated volume 1 of Erevin. We hadn't finished volume 1 yet. We ran out of money. So what do? Now, Meir had a friend named Nachum Stillerman. He was an executive director of institutions. He understood fundraising. So he said, you go back to Schottenstein. And I said, but we got from him already. He said, you don't understand. If somebody trusted you once, then he'll trust you again. You always go back to people who trusted you, who helped you.
Mm-hmm.
So we went to, we met him, and he said, he wrote out the check. And then we had the idea of getting a name grant for the whole thing. Not just the Schottenstein edition of Masechta Eruvin, but the Schottenstein Talmud. And we prepared a proposal, and we went to Columbus. We met with him in his home, and Jay was there. In the middle of the meeting, Jay went out to daven mincha, the side room, and he undertook it. He undertook it.
One might say one of the greatest investments any philanthropist has ever made.
Jay's mother at one point said, until now we were merchants, but now they know our name all over the world.
And it's true.
It's true.
It's true. In America, it's known, I think, more as the ArtScroll Gemara, although everyone knows Schottenstein and Eretz Yisrael.
It's all Schottenstein. They're going to Schottenstein.
Right. And it's definitely a tremendous chus. And then they've dedicated many other projects and volumes, the Talmud Yerushalmi.
Well, Jerome, it's funny, everybody knows they said Jerome. In those days, they called him Jerry. But anyway, he was Nebuch. He got cancer, and he was nifter after 4 or 5 volumes, not more. And Jay and Jeannie not only kept it up. Remember, Meir and I visited Jerome in Columbus on his deathbed. You know, they set up like a mini hospital around his bed, and he said, Jay will do it. He said, Jay will do it. You can trust me. Jay will do it. And Jay and Jeannie, not only did they do that, they did the Hebrew Bavli, the English Yerushalmi, the Hebrew Yerushalmi, the interlinear series. And Jay and Jeannie both say publicly, that they give us credit for changing their lives, for bringing them close to Torah and feeling that they have a share in Torah. Maybe we changed their lives. They changed our lives. They changed Klal Yisrael. They changed the lives of Klal Yisrael. I mean, just think about it. The last Siyam Hashas, 90,000 people in MetLife Stadium, 20,000 people in Barclays Center. And how many people were listening, watching it on hookups all over the world?
Unbelievable. And the growth of Daf
And
Yomi.
could that have happened without the Schottenstein family? Never. Never.
It's an unbelievable accomplishment. And it spawned many other projects because of that, the popularity of the projects that Jay and Jeannie have undertaken.
And they're individual dedicators also, of course.
Absolutely. Who are so vital to the production of each volume. Now we're talking about the Talmud. What would you say, I know this is kind of like a very general question, what do you say looking back over the last 45 years, what has been ArtScroll's greatest contribution, if there is one?
I'm not talking about books per se. ArtScroll's greatest contribution has been and continues to be, Baruch Hashem, that it brought countless, tens of thousands, maybe even a couple 100,000, into learning, into appreciating Torah, into respecting Torah. This criticism that they had of Rabbi Hertz's Chumash, who does he think he's talking to? Educated, sophisticated people. educated, sophisticated people now are learning ArtScroll Svarim. They're learning Shas. And they reach a point where they can do it on their own and just go to ArtScroll for, to check something if they're not a... Novominsker Rebbe told me, and Reb Chaim Zechron Livrocha, and Reb Chaim Levine, Yeshiva Torah Zechron Livrocha, they both told me that without ArtScroll they would not have been able to learn Daf Yomi because they have so many responsibilities. They would not have had the time to be able to learn in addition to their shiurim and everything else that they have to do. And they're not ashamed to say it.
Mm-hmm.
They're not ashamed.
What was the hardest project you ever worked on? The most difficult project?
That's hard to say. I don't know. I couldn't. Maybe Eov was very hard.
Mm-hmm. When I asked Rabbi Brander this question, I asked him, what was the hardest project you ever worked on? He told me, there's no hard project. It just means it takes a little longer.
Mm. There used to be the Navy engineers in World War II were called the Seabees, SEABs, and their motto was, the hard jobs we do right away. The impossible ones takes a little longer.
Exactly.
Nevi'im Achrayim was also hard because the word that the poetry. Mm-hmm. To be able to translate it correctly and explain it, they're hard.
So you, on the Nevi'im Achronim, you wrote the commentary as well with the translation.
Yeah.
And that was also a wide-ranging project.
Very hard, but very satisfying.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting.
You just mentioned Rabbi Brander. We haven't spoken about him. This project without Rabbi Brander would not be the same. Rabbi Brander is not only an expert in graphics. He could be the number one graphics man in Random House or Simon & Schuster or any company. Mm-hmm. He's a graphics genius, but he's a Talmud Chacham. He says a Daf Yomi shir for many, many years, and he has taste. When he's putting a page together, he doesn't just take copy and organize it on a page. He reads it and he makes comments. And then he'll do some editing while he's at it also. He's a genius.
Yeah, we see it in the work, and we see how an ArtScroll volume is immediately recognizable. You open it up, it's ArtScroll. And that, as you alluded to, is credit to Reb Sheah's genius. Mm. Why do you think...
If you're not in graphics yourself, you can't appreciate what it takes to put together the page. You have, let's say the Chumash page, okay? Chumash, Unclus, Rashi, and Balaturim, Sifsei Chachamim, and you want everything, all of them, to be on the page corresponding to the Chumash. The last word of the Targum on the page corresponds to the last word of the Chumash on the page. And if you think that's easy, try it. It's impossible. And Sheah does it.
And Reb Sheah told me that the genius of such graphics is when you don't notice anything. That it looks so seamless and so obvious that people wonder what's so hard about it.
I once saw, like I told Reb Chaim before, said if you can't explain it to the wagon driver, to the balagola, then it's not right.
Right.
I once saw a comment, the background music of movies. The greatest tribute that you can pay to the composer is that he's not even conscious that there's music. It blends in so well. It sets the scene so well that you don't even know you're listening to music.
Right. Absolutely. You, Rabbi Zlotowitz and Rabbi Brander, became this, I would call you the dream team. You work together.
Meir used to call it. He got that term from I think Peggy Noonan, a writer.
A writer, yeah.
She entitled the column "The Genius Cluster." And Meir used to use that, the genius cluster. Himself and Sheah and Rabbi Zlotowitz and Rabbi Scherman, Rabbi Marcus and Cheskel Danziger and Herschel Goldworm, and now you, the genius cluster.
There's a lot of talent under this roof.
Tremendous amount of talent.
But you and Rabbi Zlotowitz and Rabbi Brander, with humility, were able to work together so well.
I'm not humble, I'm honest.
And with a sense of humor, which is very important when you're working under pressure.
Like somebody once said, he's modest. He has a lot to be modest about.
Precisely. But you work together as a team, and I'm sure it wasn't always easy, but you got along and kind of fit together like pieces of a puzzle, because each of you brought something else to the table. Speak about that relationship.
That's another element that made it possible to succeed. Never any politics, never any backstabbing. We could argue, we could disagree, but you disagree because you're trying to find a proper solution, and now Gedalia fits into that scheme perfectly. I mean.
Yeah, and we'll get to that in a moment. I wanted to ask you also, when ArtScroll, I would call it, branched off to do something a little different from what the original outlook or goal was. And that was when you started publishing all Hebrew volumes. It was the Siddur and then Chumashim. It was a different kind of undertaking because ArtScroll became known as the translator or the elucidator. But people appreciated the perfection and the beauty, and the all Hebrew volumes have been a tremendous service as well.
True. It seemed like the logical next step. You know, many people ask for it. Mm-hmm. They say, you know, they wanted something with the same level of perfection in a sefer, an old Hebrew sefer, that they felt that they were getting in the English works.
Right. I don't know if this is a fair question, but is there any particular failure or mistake that you remember that was quite egregious, but you learned from it, and you bounced back from it, and you grew from it?
Well, I think of one particular sefer book. It had a very poetic title. It was a very good book. This goes way back. I don't even remember the title anymore. But it was a flop. Why was it a flop? And we felt, because the title didn't say anything about the sefer. It was like a nice poetic phrase. You know, we learned from that you have to have a title and a subtitle that will let the reader have an idea of what it's all about, what he might be getting if he decides to buy the book or to read the book. We had the first Sukkot master that we put out had some mistakes. Mm-hmm. It was put under pressure, deadline. It just had some mistakes, and we told people, send it back. You'll get a free copy. And we put it all into Shemus. It was a huge loss. Huge loss. I think as much as, if I remember correctly, something in the area of $80,000.
Which at that time was a large sum of money, right?
You know what? It still is. And but we swallowed it. You know, you can't. You have no right. You have no right to give people Torah or tefillah, which is not correct. Give you an example. not necessarily something that we learned from, although you could say we learned from it. In the beginning, in the early years, we were doing Sefer Yoina after the 5 Megillas. And it seemed like a logical thing, a short Sefer. It's everybody knows Mafter Yoina and Yom Kippur. And Meir had a good friend who was very, very knowledgeable in Kisvei Kodesh. In fact, in later years, he became a professor of Jewish studies at a certain university. And he was writing, and Meir was, he was reading. He says in one place, he said, Rashi made a mistake. Rashi made a mistake? Who were you to say that Rashi made a mistake? So we paid him. Took the project away from him, and started from scratch. Literally from scratch, from Pasuk Aleph. It was a matter of principle. That gives you a good idea of what Meir Zlotowitz was all about. He was a businessman. Yes, he was. You can't do things unless you can pay the bills. But he was a man of very, very high principle. Could have made a lot more money doing other things. Mm-hmm. He wanted to be a Marbitz Torah and to do it correctly. I'll tell you another thing also, and this goes back to the very beginning, and it's very important. We don't refer to any non-Orthodox sources. Not Gentiles and not so-called Bible scholars. We're here to tell people what the Torah says as the Chazal understood it and as the Rishonim and Achronim understood it. That's it. And more modern people, or what you might call progressive, or worse, have criticized it for it. Mm-hmm. There was, in the early years, there was a magazine called Moment. Still exists?
Moment magazine. I don't know, but I've heard of it.
I don't know. And Moment magazine was, a magazine of Jewish interest. It was, they tried to pattern themselves after commentary, but only on Jewish subjects. And they did an article on ArtScroll. Why? Half of the article was criticizing us for our translation of Shir HaShirim. It's a love song, and they don't present it. They falsify Shir HaShirim. Half of the article. Marvin Schick, who was a good friend and a really outstanding person. Marvin told me, he says, that article is trash. They're criticizing you. You say from the outset, you say that we're presenting it according to Chazal. And they want you to present it as an erotic love song. They're the ones who are not honest. You're honest. You said what you're doing. We don't need Bible scholars to tell us that the word of Hashem is correct. There was an old story. Somebody's being taken on a tour of the Louvre, the famous museum, and he's looking at the Mona Lisa, and he's criticizing it. He says, and the tour guide said, when you look at the Mona Lisa, you're not criticizing the Mona Lisa. The Mona Lisa is criticizing you. If people feel that this doesn't take into consideration modern philosophy and modern kfira and modern Bible criticism and archaeology, they don't get it. They don't get it. We're presenting Torah, and they're presenting the Bible. They're presenting literature. We're presenting Torah. Two
Right,
different things.
you were never trying to be all things to all people.
No.
Exactly
No.
the opposite.
Because when you try to be all things to all people, you really no things to any
To
people.
anyone, right. And that was Rabbi Meir's credo. It's been now several years since the ArtScroll family lost Rabbi Meir.
3
You
years.
lost a dear friend. And it's probably been a difficult time without him, but Klal Yisrael blessed us here in ArtScroll
HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us Gedalia.
with Reb Gedalia Zlotowitz. And talk about that transition and how Reb Gedalia has stepped in so valiantly and capably to continue to grow ArtScroll.
And the truth is that there was no transition. No transition whatsoever. Meir Gedalia has been with us, I don't remember when he started, over 20 years, maybe 25 years. I'm not good at those things. And Meir worked with him, and he was privy to everything that was going on. So when that tragic moment came, he was ready to step into his father's shoes. He's done a magnificent job.
We see it in the products that are
You see it in
coming
the
out.
product,
Yeah.
and you see it if you could see the way the team works together.
Mhm.
No politics, no backstabbing. You know, we let him know from the start, and it didn't even have to be said. It was obvious. We're here to make sure that he succeeds, and he's succeeding.
Yeah, when you walk through the halls here, you feel that unity, the common sense of purpose, the lack of ego. I think it's tangible. And I think also there's an energy here. You know, we're located right next to the bindery. For the viewers who don't know, we're all in one building here. ArtScroll Studio, the editing department, the sales department, and then we have a bindery here where books are being produced literally 24 hours a day.
24 hours a day.
And that's quite an amazing experience. Just talk about that for a moment. You started on Coney Island Avenue, moved later to 2nd Avenue, now here in Rahway, New Jersey, to a state-of-the-art facility and being able to print on demand and that whole evolution and development.
Well, when we started out, we didn't do our own binding and not our own printing. Meir was always opposed to doing our own printing because, you know, sometimes the job is not good. Sometimes there's somebody goofs in the print that doesn't work out. He said, if you're doing your own printing, you're stuck with it. If you're contracting your printing out, if it doesn't live up to specifications, you refuse the job. And every printer knows that. You know, sometimes they have to swallow a job and do it over again. Now we do printing because the process has evolved and developed, been perfected. We used to use a bindery in Goshen, New York, upstate, and then we decided we had to do our own binding. So we took space in a building in the outskirts of Borough Park, 36th Street and 14th Avenue, an industrial building. And we hired somebody who had been a career binder, a Skvera Chassid. But he grew up as a binder. And we brought in Phil Martino. With a name like Phil Martino, obviously he's a nice, good Italian boy. Also a genius in the bindery business. His father was in binding, and he's in binding. And eventually Phil managed that bindery. We ran out of space. We ran out of space in our headquarters. A little building and a little two-story and basement, attached, actually storefront building originally. And something became available. This is an amazing story. a building became available on 44th and 2nd Avenue. 2nd Avenue in Brooklyn, a full block between 44th and 45th. And it was an old building. There used to be an ink factory. And somebody took it over. They wanted to use that as a warehouse. And he decided not to do it. He didn't bother paying his taxes. And the city was taking it over. And it became available. We had to come up with $930,000 within 30 days. We could get that building. We didn't have $930 in the bank after meeting a payroll. I had been learning with Larry Tisch, who was the chairman of Lowe's Corp, and his sons. And this started in my first year in ArtScroll after I left Stone Yeshiva. A friend of mine called, and he said his brother-in-law does business with Lowe's Corp. And Larry Tisch said that he's interested in this Torah. What is it all about? He never learned Aleph Beis. I mean, he was a devout Jew, not Jewish religion, but for the cause of Israel, Jewish life, Jewish philanthropy. He was really an amazing person. And this fellow called his brother-in-law, and he called me because I didn't have to keep hours. I was more or less a free agent of working for ArtScroll, but my schedule is flexible. But I started coming to the office once a week, an hour a week, and it was Larry and his son Jim and son Tom and another son, and we became very, very close, very, very friendly. So when this building came up, $930,000, so I went to Larry and I told him, okay. So he wrote out a check for $930,000. No contract, no IOU. And of course we paid him back. And we got the building, and it was a shell. It was a shell. Squatters were living there. People had torn out the pipes, the plumbing. So we had to build it from scratch. And Baruch Hashem, we were able to get loans, financing. That became our headquarters. We were there for over 30 years. Right. And then we were able to bring the bindering into our premises. So that was in the basement. No, not a basement, first floor. Mm-hmm. And as the company grew and as we were doing more books, we needed more machinery. It kept buying more and more. And eventually it became too small. We bought the adjoining building and opened up the wall, and we're still too small. So we knew that we would have to move. And so we had a couple of agents, look for possible properties. It couldn't be in New York because real estate in New York is too expensive. And they found something in New Brunswick, which we're almost ready to buy, and the seller backed out. And then this premises came along. It was a mamash hashgacha. This magnificent building, huge building. This was Regina Vacuum Cleaner Company. Uh-huh. Yeah, it was a major vacuum cleaner company, and they were put out of business by China, like many other businesses. During World War II, it was converted into a defense factory, making things for the army. Like many big companies in America, General Motors stopped making cars. They were making tanks and who knows what else. Anyway, so we sold the 2nd Avenue property, and that was enough to buy this property and fix it up, and here we are. There was one one revolutionary product that's made a very big difference called POD, printing on demand. It was invented, maybe 10 years ago. It was fairly recently, where you can you can print as many books as you want. You see, in the printing, the publishing industry, a lot of time is taking up setting up the machine for the project, and then that can take hours, and a printing company has to charge you for those hours. So the only way to make it economical to print a book is to print 2,000 copies. 1,000 copies, it costs you a lot more. Less than 1,000 copies is prohibitive.
And you don't always need so many copies.
What do you need? So you have a book that came out 5 or 10 years ago.
Right.
It sells, let's say, 200 copies a year. So you're going to print 1,000 copies and store 800 copies for 4 or 5 years.
Right.
It's a huge financial load. And printing on demand, you can print 100, you can print 50, you can print 200. So we bought, I think we started out with 2 machines. And that was really Sheah's, Sheah managed that, Sheah Brander. He's a genius in a lot of things. He's a genius in that too. And there were bugs. It was a new product. But eventually, the manufacturers perfected it. And we bought a couple more. There was no room on 2nd Avenue for all this. Right. So here we are. And here, I think we have 6 machines or maybe even 8 machines. And most of the time, they're running 24 hours a day.
Right.
And the quality is good enough. It's ArtScroll quantity. Meir Zlotowitz would not sell a book if it was not top quality. He would not do it. And Gedalia is the same way. But here, Baruch Hashem, and you have books that come out, and they're as good as the outside product. So when you need a large run of a book, so then we have a broker who's been working with us for many, many years, and he does it. He has his companies that he works with. Or we'll have some things done in China. But, if you want something done in China, you has to be ready 4 to 6 weeks before you need it in the market.
And it takes time till you get it back.
Whereas here, we can do a POD book and bind it the same day, and the next day deliver it to the stores.
Yeah, it's a game changer.
Game changer.
Definitely. It's been an incredible experience speaking to you. And before we end, if it's appropriate, I want to thank you personally, because what
did I do now?
When I was able to join ArtScroll, and I got to meet with you, you couldn't be more gracious, more encouraging, more supportive. Great guidance and really, really heartfelt encouragement. More credit than I deserved, and I want to thank you for that. It was very meaningful.
I'm part of the genius cluster. I could tell that you were what we needed.
Well, I appreciate that, and in a very vulnerable moment and a very humbling moment, it meant a lot to hear what you had to say, and the kindness and encouragement will stay with me forever. So I thank you for that. And thank you for all you've done for Klal Yisrael as a whole, for enriching us, for inspiring us, for bringing us all closer to the Rebbeinu Shalom. You should be zeicha to continue to do so for many more years.
You make me blush, but thank you anyway.
And thanks again for these couple of hours that we were zeicha to talk.
Yeah.
Hatzlacha, all the best.